नारायणाक्षरसमाम्नयमधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिनये नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां गुण्यां करोम्यहं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुदीम्। हलन्त्यम् इति सूत्रम् अधीयमानम् अस्ति। हलन्त्यम् इत्यत्र पदद्वयं हल् तथा अन्त्यं। हल् इति उद्देश्यम्, अन्त्यम् इति तस्य विशेषणम्, इत इति विधेयम् अनुवृत्तिरूपेण तस्य विधानं भवति। तत्र समस्तपदरूपेण अपि तस्य निर्देशः सम्भवति। हल् च तत् अन्त्यम् इति हलन्त्यम् इति अपि कैश्चित् व्युत्पत्तिः दीयते, परन्तु सामान्यरूपेण शब्दद्वयमस्ति इत्येव स्वीक्रियते। तत्र कश्चन एकः प्रश्नः पूर्वस्मिन् वर्गे मया न पृष्टः, तस्य आदौ चिन्तनं कृत्वा अग्रे सरामः। हलन्त्यम् इति सूत्रे हल् इति किमर्थम्? केवलम् अन्त्यम् इति वदामश्चेत् कः दोषः?
स्वराक्षरम् अस्ति चेत् तदपि भवति किल?
तर्हि पूर्वं सूत्रं किमस्ति? उपदेशे अच् अनुनासिक इति। स्वराक्षराणां विषये अन्ते भवतु, मध्ये भवतु, आदौ भवतु, पूर्वेणैव सूत्रेण तस्य ग्रहणं कृतमस्ति। पुनः स्वराक्षराणां ग्रहणं नैव भवेत्।
परन्तु तत् केवलस्य अनुनासिकस्वराणामेव ग्रहणं करोति।
पूर्वस्मिन् सूत्रे केवलम् अनुनासिकस्वराणामेव ग्रहणम्। इदानीम् अन्त्यम् इति वदामश्चेत् सर्वे अपि अच्वर्णाः अनुनासिकाः निरनुनासिकाः वा अन्ते विद्यमानाः इत्संज्ञकाः भवन्ति वा इति प्रश्नः तत्र उदेति। तस्य स्पष्टीकरणार्थं नो चेत् व्यञ्जनस्यैव इत्संज्ञा भवेत् इति वक्तुं हल् इति शब्दः तत्र प्रयुक्तः अस्ति। अन्त्यम् इति शब्दः किमर्थम्?
अन्तिमः हल् एव इत्संज्ञा भवति, न तु मध्ये वा आदौ इति नास्ति।
केवलं हल् इति वदामश्चेत् अलोन्त्यस्य इत्यनेन अन्तिमस्यैव अल् वर्णस्य इत्युक्ते व्यञ्जनस्य इत्संज्ञा भवेत्।
पुनः एकवारं वदतु महोदय।
केवलं हल् इति वदामश्चेत् तत्र बहवः हल् वर्णाः सन्ति, तेषां प्रायेण इत्संज्ञा भवितुम् अर्हति, परन्तु अलोन्त्यस्य इति सूत्रं पश्यामः, तेन सूत्रेण किमुच्यते? अन्तिमः वर्णः, अन्तिमः अल् वर्णः। अतः केवलं हल् इति वदामश्चेदपि अन्तिमस्य हल् वर्णस्य एव इत्संज्ञा भवेत् इति कश्चन पूर्वपक्षः।
परन्तु अलोन्त्यस्य इत्यस्य प्रसक्तिः तु आदेशनिर्णयार्थम् एव क्रियते खलु?
करेक्ट्, आदेशनिर्णयार्थम् एव क्रियते। तत्र संज्ञाविधानार्थम् अलोन्त्यस्य इति सूत्रस्य प्रसक्तिः न भवति इति तत्र उत्तरम्। तर्हि येन विधिस्तदन्तस्य इति सूत्रं प्रयुञ्ज्महे।
So if antyam is removed, hal stands alone. So there is no visheshana or anything in there. So
Correct.
this cannot apply there.
Correct. So one hal is not to be considered as a last member of a word or something. We just take individual hal as one by one component and all of them will become itsamyak. Therefore, the tiyena vidhistadantasya is not applicable over here. That's exactly what I was trying to say. अग्रे गच्छामः। तत्र लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुद्यां वृत्तिः कीदृशी अस्ति? उपदेशे अन्त्यं हल् इत् स्यात्। उपदेशः आद्योच्चारणम्। आद्योच्चारणम् इति शब्दस्य द्विविधः अर्थः अस्माभिः दृष्टः। आद्यं च तदुच्चारणम्, आद्योच्चारणम् इति कर्मधारयसमासः। आद्यानां वा उच्चारणम्, आद्योच्चारणम् इति षष्ठी तत्पुरुषः। आद्यानाम् इत्युक्ते शिवः इत्यस्मात् प्रारभ्य शिवः, पाणिनि, कात्यायनः, पतञ्जलिः इत्येतेषां यत्किमपि उच्चारणमस्ति तत् उपदेशः नाम्ना ज्ञायते। तत्र उपदेशः इति शब्दस्य अन्या कारिका, अन्या व्याख्या अपि एका अस्माभिः दृष्टा। धातुसूत्रगणोणादि वाक्यलिङ्गानुशासनम्, आगमा प्रत्यादेशः, उपदेशाः प्रकीर्तिताः। सो तत्र प्रौढमनोरमायाम् अस्यां कारिकायां पुनरुक्तिदोषः अस्ति। एकवारं सूत्रम् इति वदामश्चेत् पुनः उणादि इत्यस्य निर्देशः नावश्यकः, लिङ्गानुशासनम् इत्यस्य निर्देशः नावश्यकः इति किञ्चित् उच्यते। अतः तादृशः पुनरुक्तिदोषः अस्ति, परन्तु तादृशं दोषं स्वीकृत्य अपि अनया कारिकया किं नाम उपदेशः इत्यस्य बहु सरलरूपेण स्पष्टीकरणं दीयते, अतः छात्रैः अस्याः कारिकायाः अध्ययनम् अवश्यं क्रियते। तत्र उपदेशः इति शब्दस्य द्विविधा व्युत्पत्तिः अपि अस्याः कारिकायाः आधारेण अस्माभिः दृष्टा। उपदिश्यते अनेन इति उपदेशः, so the instrument of upadesha, sutra patha, all the pathas which are captured in the first line of the karika, sutra patha, dhatu patha, gana patha, vartika patha and linganushasana patha. So all these pathas are the instruments. So upadishyate anena iti upadeshaha. The second line is about the objects, upadishyate yat saha upadeshaha. And then there is a general bhavi vyutpatti that can apply across the karika. Upadishyate, the act of giving an upadesha is called upadesha. So upadishyate saha upadeshah iti bhave api vyutpattihi bhavati. Anena prakarena tribhihi prakaraihi tatra asmabhi vyutpattihi drishta. तदनन्तरं भाष्यं स्वीकृत्य भाष्ये विद्यमानौ द्वौ प्रश्नौ अस्माभिः स्वीकृतौ। सर्वप्रथमं तु सर्वस्य हलः इत्संज्ञा प्राप्नोति। हलन्त्यम् इत्यस्मिन् सूत्रे सर्वप्रसङ्गः सर्वस्य हलः इत्संज्ञा प्राप्नोति। किं कारणं? सर्वान्त्यत्वात्. A fragment of an upadesha is an upadesha. If you read for 10 days, you have read for 5 days. So a fragment of an upadesha is an upadesha. Therefore तस्मिन् अन्ते विद्यमानः हल् वर्णः इत्संज्ञकः भवति, अतः सर्वस्य हलः इत्संज्ञा प्राप्नोति। तस्य किमुत्तरं? So we used a technique called prakarshagatihi. Prakarshagatihi, prakarsha means excellence or the excellence of highest degree, best of the best. So prakarshagatihi tatra vidnyasyate sadhiyah yah antah. The last of all these lasts will become the itsamyaka iti tatra uttaram. So I got a few questions on Anyonyashraya after the class. Let's actually understand this Anyonyashraya once again. What is happening is that there is the ita term being defined by the sutram halantyam, and the halantyam sutram uses the hala term to define ita, and that hala term in turn depends on the pre-existence of ita. So hala term depends on ita and ita term depends on hala. That is the kind of anyonyashraya that we are talking about. So halantyam iti sutrena vyanjanasya itsamnya bhavati. So if we start at any place, halantyam iti sutrena vyanjanasya itsamnya bhavati. अतः हल इति अंतिमे शिवसूत्रे लकारस्य इत्संज्ञा भवति. If all vyanjanas are itsamnyaka, then the 14th Shiva Sutram hal, that la becomes itsamnyaka. As soon as that la becomes itsamnyaka, that information is to be used to create the pratyahara of bigger hal. So hayavarat ityasmat ha iti swikrutya hal ityasya lakaram yavat hal iti pratyaharaha bhavati. So there we use the adirantena sahita and we create the hal iti pratyahara. That hala pratyahara can be created only because la is known to be ita. And after creating that hala pratyahara, we are using it halantyam and defining that la becomes ita. So this is a cyclic dependency. This is an anyonyashraya. Now there are 5 different ways of resolving this anyonyashraya that have been discussed in the bhashyam. So the first one that we tracked in the previous class was to break the sutram halantyam by doing a lakara prashlesha. Hal, la, antyam, halantyam, but hala plus la, that la goes away by sanyogantasya lopaha, hala plus antyam, halantyam. So the structure of the sutra remains unaltered. Now there was a question that was asked in the previous class, also a little bit of discussion after the class. हल प्लस ल प्लस अन्त्यम इत्यत्र अन्तिम लकारः संयोगान्तस्य लोपः इत्यनेन तस्य लोपः भवति, परन्तु संयोगः इति संज्ञा हलोनन्तरः संयोग इत्यनेन दीयते. So isn't there a kind of anyonyashraya over there also?
I have a doubt about this cyclic dependency, Mahodaya. After once we finish understanding the whole Ashtadhyayi, then only we go to do some prakriya, derivation of any word. How can it become Anyonyashraya unless and until we know the Sanyogantasya Lopa or Halonantara Sanyogaha, we won't be doing any prakriya before that, is it not? Only knowing Sanyogantasya Lopa, we are not doing any prakriya. we should be having the knowledge of whole Ashtadhyayi to do any derivation, right?
Right, but what is the
What,
question?
how can it be a cyclic dependency? I'm asking. We as human beings, we will be knowing all the sutras.
One second, one second, one second. Are you talking about cyclic dependency between Halantyam and Adirantyena Sahita?
Any cyclic dependency for that matter.
Okay. So let's so because the answer is going to be different based on your inclusion of the sutra. So let's take the basic sutras, the Halantyam and the Adirantyena Sahita. Adirantyena Sahita talks about the Pratyahara, Halantyam talks about the Itsamya, and I just mentioned there is a cyclic dependency. The question is, how can cyclic dependency come? The cyclic dependency is not in our understanding. The cyclic dependency is not an issue when we apply the sutras. The cyclic dependency is in the formalization of grammar. How is a system formalized? When you are writing a rule book, suppose you are writing a rule book for a driving exam, you cannot say write a rule 1 which depends on rule 5 and rule 5 which depends on rule 1. You have to lay down the rules systematically. If the understanding of one rule depends on another and understanding of another rule depends on one rule, then the system is not consistently defined. We are talking about the consistent definition of the system. If it was a simple textbook where on first page we say go and read 100th page, and on 100th page we come say go and now you might have understood the first page correctly, that's not an issue. But we won't call it as a formal method to capture the system. When you're formalizing physics, when you're formalizing mathematics, when you're formalizing anything in a set of rules, they have to be clear, unambiguous, and ordered properly so that one can understand them in sequence. That is what is being broken down over here. In order to understand or in order to prove the validity of Halantyam Sutram, one has to depend on Adirantyena Sahita. In order to depend on the validity of Adirantyena Sahita, one has to depend on Halantyam. Clear? Now, in the previous class, the question that was asked in the previous class, also there was a question after the previous class, is that if you have Hala plus La plus Antyam, which is our first solution, I'll come to how that works. But if you have Hala plus La plus Antyam, how can you even get rid of the La by Sanyogantasya Lopaha when the Sanyoga term is not yet taught? Halonantara Sanyoga will itself have the word Hala. So again, that sutram is adding to the problem rather than solving the problem. This was the question that was posed. I explained it in the previous class, but I don't think the explanation was clear. So the question was that if we bring Halonantara Sanyogaha and Sanyoganta Silopa in the picture, that Halonantara Sanyoga is depending on Hala, so it's actually adding to the cyclic dependency rather than solving the problem. Now understand this. The very first sutram of Ashtadhyayi is Vruddhi Radaic. Okay. How is this created? This is created using Vruddhi and Adaich. Technically, there is a Su Pratyay over there. Vruddhi, Sa and Adaich. And Sasajusho Ruhu converts Sa to Ra. Vruddhi, Ra, Adaich and Vruddhi Radaic. Forget about all this Anyanya Shraya, Halantyam Sutra, everything. I have a very basic question here. Vruddhi Radaic is 1.1.1. Sasajusho Ruhu is in Tripadi 8.2.66. How can you apply Sasajusho Ruhu on Vruddhi Radaic?
भाषायाम् अस्ति इत्येव उत्तरं किल महोदय तत्र like it's already there वृद्धिः इति already there. We are not again and again applying just the sutras for that, right?
But then Bhashayam Asti can be answer for everything in the world. Why have Vyakarana formal system? Bhashayam Asti can be the answer for everything. The
See,
whole effort of Vyakarana is
If not,
formalizing the Bhasha.
it's not we are
One second.
applying that sutra over to this sutra. It's applying, we are applying it for the word, and we can apply the sutra for the word is what I'm trying to say.
Everybody
No, but
understood what she's saying?
I think he is asking, you don't even know that Sasajushoruhu Sutra. How are you applying it in Vruddhi Radaic? That's the
Yes,
question.
that was my
Am I right?
question. But what she said is right on the spot. Let me repeat it.
Uh,
Okay. What she's saying, or what at least I understood, is that when you are applying Sasajoshu Ruhu in Vruddhi Radaic, you are not looking at Vruddhi Radaic as a sutram of Ashtadhyayi. You are looking at it as two random words like Munihi and Agachati becomes Muniragachati. In the same way, Vruddhi Su Adej becomes Vruddhi Radej. While creating the Sutram Vruddhi Radej, The placement, meaning, semantics of that Vruddhi and Radesh doesn't matter. It is simply two different words, whether they are in Ashtadhyayi, whether they are in Mahabhashyam, whether they are in Panchatantra, whether they are in normal language, doesn't really matter. When you are composing the sutram Vruddhi Radech, the sa becomes ra by a sutram called Sasajushoruhu. It has nothing to do with the fact that Vruddhi Radech is a sutram of Ashtadhyayi. So we are actually changing our perspective and we are looking at Vruddhi Sa Adich as a collection of words which are like normal words in the language and you can use the rules of the language. So interpretation of the sutras and application of the sutras are two completely different things that should not be mixed with each other. Is everybody clear on this point? Interpretation of Vruddhi Radaish by saying Vruddhi means a, I and au is a different discussion altogether. How is the sutra formed is a different discussion altogether. Formation of sutras is like formation of normal words in the grammar. It uses the rules of the grammar. It has nothing to do with the fact that Vruddhi Radech is a sutra of Ashtadhyayi. It can be sutra of Patanjali Yoga Sutra also. Still you will say Vruddhi Radech. Why? Because it's basically saying Sa becomes Ra. It's a rule of grammar. In the same way, when you have Hala plus La plus Antyam, you are getting rid of last La in the formation of the sutram by Sanyogantasya Lopaha. It has nothing to do with the meaning of the sutram Halantyam. Whereas the cyclic dependency between Adirantyena Saheta and Halantyam depends on the meaning of the sutras. Hal, the word which is to be interpreted in the sutram as a Vyanjana, is dependent on Adirantyena Saheta. That sutram has the word ita, which is to be interpreted. Antyena itasah adihi. That is dependent on the sutram Halantyam. So the cyclic dependency is in the interpretation of the sutras. Interpretation of Halantyam needs Adirantyena Sahita. Interpretation of Adirantyena Sahita needs Halantyam. When you are solving this dependency by adding an extra la, that la can be removed by Sanyogantasya Lopaha. Removal of extra la at the end by Sanyogantasya Lopaha has nothing to do with interpretation of Halantyam. It is a normal rule. Like, for example, if you have a patanta, na and ta at the end, that ta is going to go away by Sanyogantasya Lopaha. In the same way, hala plus la is going to go away by Sanyogantasya Lopaha. Therefore, Sanyogantasya Lopaha does not come in the picture of Anyunyashraya at all. Take a minute to understand, digest, and appreciate this. Difference between interpreting a sutram and using a sutram to construct another sutram. Significant difference.
In other words, when we create a sutram, it also has to abide by the rules of the grammar. So
absolutely, that is the reason. I mean, otherwise everybody will laugh at Panini that you are creating rules and you are not obeying your own rules. Right?
yeah, like it cannot be the first sutra obeying only the one rule, the next one two rules. It cannot be like that, right? Like
because the sutras are not arranged in the terms of the order in which you have to obey them, right?
To say in Sayogantasya Lopaha, when we applied for Hal Antyam, Tatra they consider Sayogantasya Lopaha consider it as mere words, just
Correct.
words.
Correct.
And in Adirantyena Saheta and Halantyam, Arthamashritya Karyam Karaniyam Ataha.
अर्थम् आश्रित्य कार्यं करणीयं नास्ति. आदिरन्त्येन सहिता इत्यत्र
Arthaha
सूत्रस्य
Apekshate.
न तदपि न सूत्रस्य अर्थः अस्माभिः पठ्यते. आदिरन्त्येन सहिता इति सूत्रस्य अर्थस्य अवगमनार्थं हलन्त्यम् इति सूत्रम् अपेक्षितम्.
हलन्त्यम् इति अपेक्षते हलन्त्यम् इति सूत्रस्य अर्थ
परन्तु तत्र
अवगमनार्थं
हल प्लस ल इत्यत्र लकारलोपार्थं हलन्त्यं सूत्रस्य अर्थः न आवश्यकः.
अर्थं न अपेक्षते. अस्तु अस्तु
तदेव.
अवगतम्.
but Sayoganta itself is defined like halonantara sayogah, right? So
That is
in
correct.
order to
That is
understand
correct.
that word, hal is again needed.
But understanding of halonantara sanyoga is a completely different discussion altogether. If you understand, see, you as a user are creating a sutram. While creating a sutram, you can apply, you have the knowledge of all the 4,000 sutras. and you have to use them while creating the sutras, right? This is very crucial and fine point, and this needs to be thoroughly clear before we move ahead.
Um, so, Mahodaya, could it have been, suppose, just hypothetically, could it have been possible that Adirantayana Saheta comes first and then Halantyam? Because it has been
Adirantine Sahita
organized
comes
by.
first. No, Adirantine Sahita does come first in Ashtadhyayi.
Okay, but when Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi ka raha, when he did it, he kept Halantyam first and then Adirantayana Saheta. Even if it was the other way around, it would not have made
It's
much
up
of
to
a
him.
difference,
See,
right?
he is reordering the sutras on his own. He can do whatever he wants. He could have put the Upadesha Ajanunasika Ita also first.
No,
So
looking
yeah,
at the
that's
connection
absolutely.
between these two, that is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Adinantena Sahita is also. In Siddhanta Kaumudi, these two sutras are first and second. Here he puts what in in Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi he puts it fourth. So there is significantly but two more sutras in between. But in Siddhanta Kaumudi, first is Halanyam, second is Adirantena Sahita. So they are consecutive. One could have flipped their order also. Any further questions on Anyanya Shraya? We are coming to the solutions. We have not yet talked about the solutions. Only the problem.
Mahodaya, this
Yes.
Adirantayana Sahita in Ashtadhyayi Krama, it is in first part of first Adhyaya,
Yes.
whereas Halantyam is in the third Adhyaya.
Third pada.
Yes, third pada of the first Adhyaya. So after explaining two pada, again still is there cyclic dependency? Is it only related to Sudha Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi, or even in Ashtadhyayi Krama it is Anyonashriya is there?
The Anyonyashraya is in Ashtadhyayi. Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi or Sudha Teeka have no business of creating additional complexities. I mean, if just a mere see, Ashtadhyayi is not ordered by hierarchy. Understand this point. Let me repeat this again and again. Ashtadhyayi does not say that you have to apply the first sutram, then second sutram, then third sutram, then fourth sutram, and so on. So basically, the ordering of sutras, Adirantina Sahita and Halantyam inside Ashtadhyayi, it does not say that Adirantina Sahita is a prerequisite for Halantyam. Sutras are being ordered with a certain specific other goal in mind. The fact that there is a dependency of Adirantina Sahita on Halantyam and Halantyam on Adirantina Sahita is a fundamental cyclic dependency problem inside Ashtadhyayi. And there are many such cyclic dependency problems in the Ashtadhyayi. Nishtha depends on Bhute, Bhute depends on Nishtha. We'll come to all those things at some other point in time. The cyclic dependency is broken in different ways in all these cases. Cyclic dependency in formalization of a system needs to be broken down. And the way to break it over here is 5 different techniques. We are yet to enter those.
Even while creating the sutram, that's what I was trying to say. Like without a grammar jnana, they are not creating it, right? That's already there, and then he is just formalizing it. So we cannot expect that without grammar it can be, right? So yeah.
That is correct. Again, you're missing the point. Formalization cannot be ambiguous. You are teaching addition and subtraction to somebody else. You cannot formalize it in a book by saying for learning addition, go learn the subtraction, and for learning subtraction, go and learn addition. That does not make any sense. While teaching to a kid, what you assume that there are two mathematical operations that are dependent on each other. What you will do is you will teach some part of this, then some part of this, then come back here, then come back there. You will probably teach them with a mix and match manner so that everything is clear. But that is not formalization of a system. If he wanted to do that kind of formalization, he could have broken down Halantyam into two different sutras. One where only giving the insomnia of law so that the cyclic dependency is broken down. In order to break that cyclic dependency, all that we need is one extra lakara of 14th Shiva Sutram getting the Itsamnya separately. That's all that we need. हल इति अंतिमे माहेश्वर सूत्रे विद्यमानः लकारः तस्य इत्संज्ञा भवति चेत् the cyclic dependency is completely broken down. Is that clear? So that's all that we are doing by introducing an extra la by doing the prashlesha. And a bunch of other techniques that we will learn will kind of focus on the same thing. They will somehow try to make the itsanya of the last hal, the la of that last hal separately without bringing Adir Antina Sahita in the picture. Then the cyclic dependency is broken down. So that brings us to the solution. How is double lakara going to help? Hal la antyam. As soon as the la becomes itsamyaka, that information is used in the 14th Shiva Sutram hal to make that la itsamyaka. Now there is no adirantena sahita till this point because we are just saying la is itsamyaka. So in the 14th Shiva Sutram hal la becomes itsamyaka. That la is combined with h on the top of hayavarata to create hal as a pratyahara using adirantena sahita. All the vyanjanas are now included in the pratyahara. Now come back to halantyam for the hal part, which will say hal antyam, the last hal. Now you know hal is a vyanjana, the last vyanjana is itsamyaka. Essentially, all the vyanjanas occurring at the end become itsamyaka. So the trick is to break down the sutram so that la becomes itsamyaka separately. That's all that we care. As soon as la becomes itsamyaka independent of the halantyam sutra, we are done. Clear this point?
So you are saying after that last la has got that itsanya hal antyam. The antyam hal is the last la of the 14th sutra. Then the hal
No,
which is
I am saying hal plus la plus antyam.
yeah, hal plus
La
la plus
part of
antyam.
la part refers to last la of hal.
That is the hal plus la. That la part refers to the last
Shiva
la,
Sutram.
last
Correct.
Shiva Sutram.
So that
After
law is
that,
Itsamyaka. That
that
law becomes
okay,
Itsamyaka. Now
okay.
you use Adirantyena Sahita Sutram, which
Mm.
says that any Adi letter combined with Itsamyaka letter causes a Pratyahara and captures everything in between. Antyena itasah adihi madhyaganam swasya cha samnyasya. Now, who is the Adi that we are going to take? The Adi that we are going to take is H of Hayavarat because that's Adi. So that H of Hayavarat combines with the only Itsamyaka letter that you know, which is L of Hala. You don't know any other Itsamyaka letter. Only thing that you know is L of Hala. So that
Mm.
H combines with L to create a Pratyahara called Hala. What does the Pratyahara represent? It represents all the letters in between and H. Antyena itasah adihi madhyaganam swasya cha samyasya. Now, Sudhaji asked a question last time. What happens to chota chota itsamyaka letters? Still not answered. We will answer that when we talk about Adirantina Sahita. I have not yet talked about Adirantina Sahita. I'm just saying that Pratyahara has been created. Once the Pratyahara has been created, it represents all the Vyanjanas. All the Vyanjanas. So, Hala is now a synonym for all the Vyanjanas because Ha to La is all the Vyanjanas. So Hala is now synonym for all the Vyanjanas. Now you come back to Halantyam Sutram first component where Hala part was there and you say Antyam Hala, the last Vyanjana becomes itself.
So here we are using that hal plus l just to give an explanation for the halantyam. Am I right?
Just to
Uh,
break the cyclic dependency of
okay. Of
Halantyam
halantyam.
with Adirantina Sahita.
Okay. Okay.
But
Okay,
the
clear?
ordering is still remains here because we are splitting the sutra into two different things. If we are understanding one component, going to the next sutra to understand another component of that sutra, this is needed. So some, even if you, how will you put it in order for you have to again repeat the sutra, like that is how it
Very
puts
good.
into.
So we are breaking the Halantyam Sutram. We are understanding one component of. See, the entire Halantyam Sutram depends on Adirantyana Sahita, but one component does not depend on that. So you break the Sutram, you understand one component separately. Understanding of that component helps you to understand Adirantyana Sahita, which was otherwise dependent on the Halantyam. So the understanding that component, then go to Adirantyana Sahita, understand Adirantyana Sahita fully. There is no component compartmentization, half breaking or whatever. Understand Adirantyana Sahita fully, come back to Halantyam for understanding the remaining component.
दीक्षितानां मते सः द्विवारम् उच्चारयति किल हलन्त्यं हलन्त्यम् इति that is more convincing.
I'll come to
I
that.
feel.
I'll come to that. So we have 5 different ways. Siddhanta Kaumudi talks only one of those methods, which is what she has told. And the reason why Siddhanta Kaumudi says only one of those methods is because on a logical level that looks like the best of the solutions. So Siddhanta Kaumudi prefers that. But as student of grammar, it's equally fun to understand remaining four. Some of these are mind-blowing methods. So even this one, the Prashlesha itself was mind-blowing, right? Before you did not know this, you had no idea that extra law can be inserted like this. Each of the methods is equally, phenomenal. The second method is ekashesha. So that's what he says. Halantyam itsamnyam bhavati lakarashriti vaktavyam. That's what the first method. Second method is ekashesha nirdeshadva. What is ekashesha nirdesha? Sarupanam ekashesha ekavibhaktau iti kinchana sutramasti. When you are talking about two Ramas, you say Rama Rama, and then one of that is removed, and you just say one Rama, and then you do vibhakti forms on that Rama. When there are five Ramas, you don't say Rama 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 Gachati. You get rid of remaining four and just keep one. Sarupanam ekashesha ekavibhakto. Only one remains, everything else is removed. So here he says there are actually two hulls. Hull hull antyam. And he has done ekashesha and got rid of one hull. So hal hal antyam is the original sutram. Like Rama Rama gachati, you will say Ramau gachataha. In the same way, hal hal antyam, he has broken down. So it's hal cha halau. And then because of the sandhi karyam, it goes back to the pratipadika stage and says hal plus antyam halantyam. So there are two hulls here is what he's saying.
Why two hulls, Mahodaya? We were talking about hull and ill only, right?
Wait, that was the first solution. That's gone.
Correct. Okay.
Now we are talking about the second solution. Each solution will start with the problem. You don't have to reuse the previous solution in a new solution. Each solution will start with the original problem. We have to break Anyanyashraya. How will you break Anyanyashraya? First learn the technique and then learn its effectiveness. Kim kurmaha? Hal hal hal. Hal cha hal iti vadamaha. See, ekashesha nirdeshat. Athava ekashesha nirdesha. Athava means the second technique is being explained. Ekashesha nirdesha ayam. Hal cha hal. Just like Ramascha becomes Ramau. Halcha will become Halau, and then in the Samasa it will become Hala. You get what I'm saying? Rashtranam patihi rashtrapatihi. Rashtrasya patihi rashtrapatihi. Whether the Purva Pada is in the Ekavachanam, Dvivachanam, Bahuvachanam, it remains in the Ekavachanam. When it goes, Samasa has to be done, we go back to the Pratipatika stage. So halcha halau, but in the Pratipatika stage it will be Hal. So Hal plus Antyam. So the sutram halantyam is to be broken down as samasa, hal plus antyam. The first hal is also a now a ekashesha. Halcha is equal to hal. So now we are having two hulls. One hull of this pair, hal, now represents 14th Shiva Sutram. So hal antyam, this is to be taken as halaha antyam. We take a liberty and we convert it into Shashti and we say Halaha Antyam. Hal iti Shiva Sutrasya Antyam. Halaha Antyam. Hal iti Shiva Sutrasya Antyavaranaha ityukte lakaraha itsamnyakaha bhavati. As soon as la becomes itsamnyaka, the problem is solved. You go to Adirantyena Saheta, take the previous ha, the entire hal now can be defined. It will capture Vyanjanas. Come back to halantyam, interpret the first hal, which is basically all the Vyanjanas. So all the Vyanjanas occurring at the end are itsamnyaka.
Mother, can you repeat that once? And one more question. That ekashesha applies if both are identical, right? So if one represents all the vyanjanas and the other one represents the 14th sutram, then how can you do ekashesha?
This is a very good question. I actually expected this question. You have to take some kind of liberty over here because this is a solution that has been proposed and we have to somehow justify it. It is perfectly right that it applies to both of them which are identical. However, when you're saying Rama plus Rama and you're doing an Ekashesha over there, Rama, is it identical Rama? One might be fat, one might be thin, one might be tall, one might be short. It's just two Rama people. You get what I'm saying?
As long as the Rupa and the Vibhakti is the same, then we can do ekasheshas. What?
Exactly. So here the previous hull and the next hull, all the 21 forms are same. So then you can do ekashesha over here. Clear? So understand the technique and the explanation. So technique is that hala is ekashesha, so it becomes hala hala antyam. What was the first technique? Hala la antyam. What is the second technique? Hala hala antyam. Ekashesha. How is hala hala antyam helping? That's a different discussion. How is it helping? One of the halas is the Shiva Sutram. The second hala, for example, is the Shiva Sutram. That is to be interpreted as Shashti Samasa, Halaha Antyam. You can take that much liberty and say Sautra Nirdeshaha, so treat it as a Shashti Samasa. So Halaha Antyam. There the word Hala does not mean Vyanjanas. We don't even know that. It means the 14th Shiva Sutram Hala. Tasya Antyam. So that's the la of that Hala, the last letter. That becomes its samyak. As soon as la becomes its samyaka, you can go back to Adirantena Sahita, pick the first hakara with the last lakara, create the pratyahara hala, meaning all the vyanjanas, come back to the halantyam. The first hala is not yet resolved, refer it to say vyanjanas and resolve it. All the vyanjanas at the end are its samyaka.
How do you do the vigraha of the samasa here, Mahodaya? Like, but one hal is there. So you do halascha, halau.
Halcha, halcha, hal. We just say halcha,
Okay.
halcha, hal. That's exactly what is written over here. See, halcha,
Okay.
halcha, hal. Is
But
just
that you said
ekashesha.
only when joined in the samasa, like after when we join with the antyam, yeah, you take only the pratipadikam. It's
Correct.
fine.
So
But
if you want
before
to
that,
normally do the, if you want to normally do the just the sentence, you can say halcha halcha halau. That's okay.
halcha, halau.
Halau. But what
So,
is the pratipadikam? Hal.
correct. But I'm saying after you do the halau, you don't actually separate one hal with antyam and then another hal with antyam, right? So, right, you are saying the second hal, whatever that we are assuming here, is doing the anvaya with that antyam. The
See,
vigraha will be
when you say Ramau gacchataha, the first Rama is going separately and the second Rama is going separately. So gacchataha has an anvaya with each Rama separately, right? Whether they are going together or whether they are going on 2 different days or whatever. Gacchataha has an anvaya. Gama dhatu, Gamana kriya has an anvaya with each Rama separately. So Antyam
okay.
has an anvaya with each hal separately.
But even the karaka is going to be, one will be that sashti tatpurusha and another will be with a different senses.
That's
Okay,
what
is that
I'm
what you're
saying,
saying?
that much is the liberty that we have to take. That is the kind of liberty sautratvat tadrusham kartum shakyate. Because you have
But
other examples in Ashtadhyayi where a Shashti is being used even when the sutra says Prathama. So
but
these kind of
Praudhamana,
things are already there in Ashtadhyayi, so we can use these kind of techniques.
but in Praudhamanorama, Dikshita says that halaha antyam iti brahmanasya kambalaha iti udaharanam datva nirakritam kila. Halaha
You
antyam iti
are
shashti.
again, so again, I'm saying the same thing, that Dikshita uses one approach and he
Yeah,
tries to discuss
is
how his approach is better than everything else. We are not
but
comparing different approaches here and there. We are just
but
looking at what various approaches Bhashyakara has proposed. Which technique is better and which is less better is individual human opinion. So Dikshita chooses one because he thinks that is better. So it is his job to show why other four are wrong. But we have not gone till there. We have still just understood one. Then we have just started understanding the second. We'll come to Dikshita.
Yeah, just to be clear, Mahodaya, for the samasa, so the first one we are taking as Visheshana Uttarapada Samasa, and the next one we are taking as Sashti Tatpurusha Samasa, if
The
we are
second one
splitting
we
it
are
like that.
taking as Shashti Tatpurusha Samasa. The first one is a normal Visheshana Purvapada.
It's
Because
not a
Hal
Purva.
can be
Oh,
because Hal can be considered as a Visheshanam for Antyam. You can consider Visheshana Uttarapada also. I'm not saying that is wrong. It's eventually all theoretical. So even if you say Antyam is the Vishesha and Hal is the Visheshana, who cares? So you can do it either way. And Visheshana Purvapada is easy to justify. Visheshana Uttarapada is very specific type of samasas. Vyakarana Khasuchi and so on. So very rare kind of samasas are in the Visheshana Uttarapada category. So Visheshana Purvapada is a common one. It is possible to justify that Visheshana Purvapada also by staying Antyam as the Vishesha and Hal as the Visheshana.
Now, why I'm saying is that we are actually denoting to the Hal letter and which is at the end of something like
So I can
I
put
just
it in a different way. An ending letter is considered its samyaka as long as it is Hal. Okay, so I can put it in a different way. Any questions on the validity of this method or understanding of this method? We will talk about, I'll come to the question of the Prouಢ Manorama and we'll talk about why one is better, why one is not better and so on. But any question about a standalone method of having Ekashesha? So this is second technique. See, lots of new tantras, lots of new devices we are learning. We talked about Prashlesha, we talked about Prakarsha Gati, long back we have talked about Yoga Vibhaga. Now we are talking about Ekashesha. Is also a technique used by grammarians to justify their siddhantas. Ekashesha. The whole point, the whole thing that we want to do to solve the problem is to single out that la. As soon as la gets singled out, the problem is solved. So one way to single that out is do a lakara prashlesha, which is most obvious and which is probably most powerful. The second way to single out the lakara is to say hal is a separate sutram by doing ekashesha, halcha halcha hal.
than the circular reference itself, this becomes more difficult because you have to interpret one Hal as one thing, another Hal as another thing, like that, right, Mahodaya?
So in this way, one hal is to be interpreted as one thing, another hal is to be interpreted as another thing. That's exactly what Dikshita will also propose. Dikshita is going to propose yet another method where he does the same thing. So we'll talk about that. So this is yes. So you're reinterpreting the sutram in two different ways. One component in one way, other component in other way. Any further questions on the Ekashesha method? So understand this. Ekashesha nirdeshadva अथवा means that has been explained further. Ekashesha nirdeshah ayam halcha halcha hal. So two hulls halantyam itsamnyam bhavati. So two hulls. The second hull represents the Shiva Sutram hull. That has to be converted into Shashti Tatpurusha. That l, this is halaha antyam. That l becomes itsamnyaka. Then the cyclic dependency is broken down because now we can go to Adirantina Sahita, create a pratyahara, come back to interpret the first hal.
One observation. So having that second her is also can also be used in this explanation.
Having two her is very crucial in all these techniques of breaking cyclic dependency. So extra her which is present in Maheshwara Sutra has played a very crucial role in all these techniques. What does Siddhanta Kaumudi do is as follows. Understand this. There is a third technique which is given in Siddhanta Kaumudi for breaking this issue. Siddhanta Kaumudi says you repeat the sutram. You say the sutram two times. Halantyam halantyam. Punaravartanam karaniyam. Sutram has to be repeated two times. When I say repeated, it is definitely at least two times. So sutram has to be repeated. Halantyam halantyam. Okay. And now when you have two occurrences of the same sutram, can it mean the same thing? Why would Panini write the same sutram 10 times? So each halantyam has to be interpreted differently. Thus, first halantyam should be interpreted using Shashti Tatpurusha Samasa, halaha antyam halantyam, and there halaha means the 14th Shiva Sutra. So halaha antyam halantyam will create the la of the 14th Shiva Sutram as its samyaka. Then you come to Adirantena Saheta and create a pratyahara. Then you go back to the halantyam for the second interpretation, or you go back to the second avrutti of halantyam, and there you do the normal division as hal means vyanjana, antyam means last, halantyam gives the itsamnya for all the vyanjanas. So this technique is exactly powered by the second ekashesha, but instead of having these problems like one is shashti samasa, you are breaking down ekashesha, the problems that we were talking about, these problems have been smoothly resolved by giving the repetition of the sutram rather than calling it ekashesha. So the technique given in Siddhanta Kaumudi is significantly better than the technique of Ekashesha, purely because that's exactly the reason in a sutram, when you do an Ekashesha, one cannot go by Shashti Tatpurusha, other cannot go by Karmadharya. These are the kind of questions that Dikshita says, and then he says the better answer is to have a punaravartanam, an avrutti, a repetition of the sutram, halantyam halantyam. First halantyam talks about halaha antyam. Now it's a different sutram, so different interpretation is possible. Second talks about hal antyam.
Could you just elaborate on the explanation of the second halantyam that you mentioned? I understood the first one.
First halantyam says halaha antyam, which means that the 14th Shiva Sutram hala, the la of that becomes its samyaka. Now you go to adirantyena sahita, la is its samyaka, ha is on the top, adihi antyena itasah. The last la with the first ha can become hala, which is the pratyahara, representing all the vyanjanas. So now you know hala means what? It means all the vyanjanas. You did not know that earlier, but now you know hala means what? All the vyanjanas. Come back to the halantyam, hal antyam, and that is the vyanjanas occurring at the end are its. First, you did not know hal was vyanjanas. There was an anyunyashraya. But you break it down. The whole point is to bring the last Shiva Sutram in the picture. That's all that we are doing every now and then. Whether it by Prashlesha, whether it is by Ekashesha, whether it is by Avruttihi. So new technique we learned, Punaravartanam or Avruttihi is what is called repetition of the sutra. Okay, another device, another tantra. Any questions? So we have learned three techniques so far. First was Lakara Prashleshaha. Second was Ekashesha. Third was Punaravrittihi.
This halantyam, punaravartanam is also part of these four which are there in the.
No, this is not mentioned in the Bhashya. Bhashya has a different technique. So out of Bhashya, we have covered only two. This Ekashesha thing which is in the Bhashya has been reformulated or repackaged as Avritti. That's the reason I took it right away. Okay. So Bhashya has four techniques.
Halantyam is the Ekashesha of halantyam. Instead of saying it is
That
not
is,
hal.
That is, yes.
He's
That is
saying
also one way to
halantyam
look at it.
equals to halantyam.
Not Bhashya. Bhashya does not say that. Bhashya says hal, that's Ekashesha. But Dikshita extrapolates that and says instead of halantyam, instead of hal, we say halantyam. But again, he doesn't use the word Ekashesha because Ekashesha causes a problem because each of them is being reinterpreted separately. So he says Punaravrittihi bhavati. Let's go to Kaumudi if you want.
Okay.
So he says hal iti sutre antyam itsyat. That's the meaning of halantyam. In the halantyam, the meaning that he gives is hal Maheshwara Sutram 14 ityasmin sutre lakara it samyakaha bhavati. Then he gives adirantyena saheta. So then after adirantyena saheta, he creates hal samnya. And then he gives the second meaning of halantyam, upadeshe antyam halitsyat. Okay, so two different meanings have been given.